my talk today is about my dissertation on Donna Haraway. Currently, I'm writing with this working title, Donna Haraway on the redefinition of boundaries of sex, gender, and biomechanical species. Um, I decided today to give you a short introduction on that because I never did that into an international audience. And so I decided just to introduce you into this dissertational project. So this is the agenda. I will first introduce you into the origins and personal motivations of my topic, then into the three different spheres of this dissertation, and will finally conclude with a little outview. But let's begin. Um, our society, both human and artificial, is determined and categorized by ontologies and boundaries. Humans naturally categorize and classify themselves and their environment. These boundaries serve as anchor, a fixed point of reference from which we can observe, categorize, analyze, judge, and ultimately determine the world. These boundaries accompany us from any early age, beginning in the microcosm of the family through the transmission of certain role models and functions, values and norms, such as the caring mother or the dominant decision maker, often exercised by the father. Through education in public institutions, be they daycare centers, schools, or training centers, which prescribe and define values and norms, limits and freedoms, duties and rights, opportunities and difficulties. Drawing boundaries is an elementary part of our human cosmos. But boundaries go deeper than the realms of everyday life. They also fundamentally define what nature or culture is, what a legal person is, and who is considered as such. In other words, boundaries that defined our daily lives. The demarcation of boundaries has been an integral part since the Enlightenment and since times of Kant, Rousseau, Hobbes, Locke, and many other male representatives. But it also highlights the problem that demarcation, as in this case of the dominant gender, produces the modest female witnesses who are overlooked, ignored, hidden, or banished by patriarchal values, norms, and boundaries. Of course, today we are also speaking of non-binary people. This presentation is based on an article where I only focused on women and male. That's why I'm not speaking so much in the following about non-binary people, but of course they are also mentioned. Exactly. So, who, for example, thinks of names like Olympe de Gouges, Emily du Châtelet, Margaret Cavendish, or Mary Wollstonecraft in the fears of enlightenment? The set answer is often far too few or none at all. While theories of women such as Donna Haraway, Simone de Beauvoir, Karen Baratz, or Jana Truth are critically examined, and their value and usefulness for science is strongly questioned, the named works and theories of male thinkers as Martin Heidegger, Immanuel Kant, John Rawls, Gottlob Frege are taken for granted without further critical questioning. This blatant demarcation between the sexes, but although in the culture of society and the practice of science and research, is a fact that we as a society must face and critically confront. Since the achievements of the sciences, which is today include gene editing, human enhancement, the rise of cybernetics, quantum computing, and many breathtaking, groundbreaking, and boundary-pushing theories, the question of boundaries has become fundamental. How far can we go with the existing boundaries, some of which date back to the time of the great European revolutions, the imperialist era, or the ideologies of the Cold War? Is it not time to redefine these boundaries in favor of a more modern and perhaps more efficient models? Why do we still have these boundaries which are already considered to have failed? These are all questions which you could of course go on questioning, but they are all these questions which may came up if you're looking today on science on its patriarchal history. In short, boundaries as they exist in our patriarchal and androcentric world cannot remain as they are. My dissertation project focuses on these boundaries and on the three areas where they had a particularly serious impact, showing us today that a reorientation of our world is urgently needed. My core areas in my dissertation are, first, the patriarchal corporality and its false boundaries. This idea came to me when I have given one of my first talks here at the Women and Their Body conference by Dr. Jill Muller, because they introduced a first idea on the cyborg mechanisms, which I also will introduce to you later. The second part will deal about social boundaries, especially in the microcosm and their impact on gender equality with social boundaries. I mean, things like the sex gender connotation or other, let's say, dualistic theories, which are really important in our society. And the third and final part would deal with the male-dominated scientific culture that has led to the exclusion of marginalized groups and the exploitation of subjects and participants. These three fears are all addressed by Donna J. Haraway in many of her different works and are the basis of my doctoral thesis project. In the following, I would like to briefly present you these three fears and their scope in order to emphasize the need for change. The descriptions are not final or complete, as this dissertation is, of course, a research project still in progress. So there are also still some changes happened during I had written this paper. So the first part is patriarchal corporality and its false boundaries. Some of you maybe who had listened to my past talks will maybe, let's say, detect something what they already have heard, but yeah, I've also decided to represent this again. One's own body is one of the most personal and intimate physical as well as social aspects of a person and human entity. Everyone perceives their body differently, controls it, cares for it, defines it. Corporality or physicality is an important component for everyone. Without it, we cannot move, act, or express our feelings. The body is a reflection of ourselves. At first glance, it seems logical to say that the body is self-determined and that everyone has control over it. Unfortunately, the last few millennia of patriarchal power have shown all too clearly that this is not the case. Everyone's body is often determined by others. This heteronomy begins with the banal everyday processes or partnerships we are having, such as physical self-optimization, and continues with people who we are hiring as trainers or nutrition coaches, for example, or who are close to us, such as family members. They all have big and strong influences, of course, on our body and our individual development. It ends with the physical determination by state, medicine, and social powers that determine and dominate our bodies through laws, norms, values, and rules. There are many examples of this heteronomy throughout history. They can be found in all areas of society and science, including biology, law, medicine, sexuality, sports, nutrition, and many others. These are all areas that we can adapt, optimize, which in turn shape our lifestyles, which are determined by laws, trends, fashion, and social norms. It quickly becomes clear that the body is anything but self-determined and that we are almost completely permeated by these external influences and dogmas. Women are still defined, but of course also men and other genders, in the natural sciences that show how little control women have over their own bodies. It begins with medical interventions and treatments that are not standardized for the female body, but for the male body. It continues with the development and administration of therapeutics and medicines that are not tailored to the female cycle or hormone balance or reproductive system. Physical indeterminacy culminates in violent crimes committed by men against women's bodies, whether in private or public spaces. Of course, this list of oppression mechanisms is endless, and I could also add a lot more, but I think this is enough to give you a short shape on it. Behind all this is a purely patriarchal social striving that has conquered all areas of our world. Since the emergence of feminism, attempts have been made to break through this sovereignty of interpretation and to abolish male-dominated patterns. The focus is always on the female body or the quest for legal equality, for example, the right to bodily self-determination or abortion. And the female body is therefore the symbol of this striving for power and also stands for the fact that the problem of patriarchy goes deeper than the supposed equality of the sexes suggests. At its core, it's about self-determination, equal participation, gender-neutral rights, responsibilities, and advancements. In other words, it is about existing social, historical, and patriarchal boundaries that need to be overcome or reinterpreted. Donna Haraway first criticizes this practice with her publication in one of her essays, A Cyborg Manifesto. In this essay, Haraway criticizes the patriarchal social and political dominance in Bavarian terms, degrades women as the secondary sex, and imposes male values and ideas on them. The circumstances in which her essay was written were marked by the first fundamental upheavals in politics, science, and world affairs. The world has at the heat of tension between the policy of nuclear armament and an impending apocalyptic vision of the male domination and the striving for dominance. At the same time, the world undergone a transition to a world of high technology, which opened up new possibilities for humanity through technological success in the field of computing, the high-tech era itself, and the strengthening of capitalist aspirations. At that time, science produced numerous technologies that have fundamentally changed the way we live today. Last but not least, increasing capitalization and technologization made the world a more global connected sphere. Globalization takes on special meaning and people begin to engage in intercontinental dialogue and exchange. Politically, it is also a time of social upheaval. Women's demands for equal rights and equality were at the forefront, and particularly the issue of bodily integrity and self-determination were and are still the central demands of feminist movements worldwide. These demands are accompanied by ongoing racial conflicts in the United States. These conflicts have reached a dramatic peak, placing a particular burden on marginalized women of color. Haraway's manifesto was born in a turbulent time. She attempts to make sense of all these political, social, and scientific upheavals, and with the cyborg, she created a myth that unexpectedly is still of great interest today. Her idea of the cyborg, a non-human being per se, has the ability to unhinge the man-made structure of boundaries. By claiming that women, for example, workers, women of color or queer people, indigenous people, and a lot more, could be assigned to the realm of cyborgs due to the emerging times and upheavals in technology, science, and society. Donna Haraway takes it to the extreme. The trick with the cyborg she uses as a creature of patriarchal dominance and supremacy and stylizes it as a symbol of masculine interpretive and cultural weakness that the strength of marginalized groups. In her view, a being that is not purely human cannot be subordinated to human ontologies, value systems, legal structures, and cultural spectra. This figure, stylized by man as a fantasy of omnipotence, thus exposes itself and now allows women and marginalized groups to use this construction as a new being for themselves. The cyborg can be anything but not human or male. Through this fallacy of masculine science, Haraway showed that the supposedly valuable rules and mechanisms of science, especially biology, engineering, humanities, and humanism, as established by man, do not stand themselves. The cyborg now serves as a projection surface for new boundaries that include all human species and machine beings. The cyborg also shows how corporality has been dominated and fantasized by man. Thus, the idea of the cyborg resembles both military ideology and artistic representation, such as the idea of the Terminator in 1984, produced by James Cameron, resembles both. That is about a semi-human, semi-machine dominant being who are both physically and cognitively superior to all humans. At the same time, this image shows how poor and multifaceted the patriarchy's body image is and how it ignores or embellishes the body images of its own species. But most men do not conform to this fictionally stylized ideal. The cyborg, in my opinion, is one of the first examples of this problem of demarcation on such a broad scale. I examine this figuration more closely on the basis of Haraway's works, not only the Cyborg Manifesto, also of other works, because she's always referring to it, and will draw conclusions about the creation of ontologies in society, science, and corporality. On this, maybe a short notice to these pictures. I've chosen these pictures just to show how much diverse this idea of cyborg in the actual time is. You have this very male-made person in the left corner above, then you have on the right upper side the idea of, I think, Lynn Randolph, who let's say, painted a vision on her own about Donna Haraway's idea of how a cyborg could look like. And then, of course, you have two examples here from now the current period, like bodily enhancement, which artificial intelligent prosthesis, which can be used. And also this cyborg activist Neil Harbison, which you can see on the right corner down, because he's the first official cyborg in the world, which has also in his passport stated that he is a cyborg. He's wearing an infrared antenna to see color, or let's to hear colors, because he has color blindness. Such a short notion on these pictures and why I've chosen that. However, there are other texts and concepts in which Donna Haraway addresses the issue of corporality, but also the cyborg. In her 1993 published book, Modest Witness at Second Millennium, Female Man Meets Oncomouse, Feminism and Technoscience, she explores the question of female corporality through male scientific practices. In general, two cultures are discussed. On the one hand, the theories, the idea of women as undemanding or modest witnesses within science. This example must be read historically, as Haraway criticizes male scientific practice in which women often acted as incompetent and immature observers without being allowed to act or being asked to take on the role as scientists. This analysis is broken down by the reference to a Joanna Russ work, The Female Man, in which the patriarchal view of femininity is critically questioned and rethought. Haraway adopts the point of view of Joanna Russ and correctly concludes that the role of women in science and society is still defined and determined by men. On the other hand, she addresses the burning issue of female self-determination in matters of reproductive medicine then and now. At its core, Haraway discusses the role of the fetus in our society and science and the implications of this thinking for women who, once pregnant, are disempowered in many ways and subjected to an object that is not yet born and legally capable. The focus of her analysis is the role of the fetus in our society and its role in the womb. The role of the woman as a carrier of the fetus and as a bearer, as well as the sacrifices she has to make for this role. In addition, Haraway analyzes the negative effects of pregnancy on women, the abortion debate, and the advantages and disadvantages of modern reproductive medicine. All these ideas and debates are important steps in my dissertation to introduce the critique on social boundaries and misleadings within science. This section flows seamlessly into the section on social norms and values, and it's the introductory basis for my research project, which then leads to problems in society and science, where I will now go over. In many cases, the physical inscriptions examined in the first part of my research are based on boundaries that are an active part of our society and the basis for everyday action. These are the spheres of technoscience, of gender, age, professional qualification, wealth, the so-called soft and hard powers, but also the spheres of culture and multimedia. All of these aspects often seem trivial to us, but they have an enormous impact on how we interact, what relationships we form, what friendships or enemies we maybe make, what political agendas we pursue, how we act, and how all of this feeds into our thinking and worldviews. These mindsets and worldviews lead to a patriarchal culture of thought in institutions such as politics, law, science, social studies, but also in the humanities, and of course a lot more. As explained in the first part of this talk, this culture of thought leads to limitations that restrict scientific potential. On the other hand, they question the limits of previous scientific research and standards. In her works, Haraway describes that we are in a social epoch of technoscience, a time of great upheavals in science, society, and culture. In this work, she outlines a scheme to illustrate what technoscience is. I visualize this now for you. Of course, this is a product from one of my seminars, which my acceptance, where we had a look on this book, Modest Witness, and we then discussed what are maybe the spheres which are have a lot impact on technoscience itself, and this was at the end the conclusion of it. Like technoscience, our society draws its intellectual, cultural, and artistic capacities from these spheres. From here also comes the ability to draw boundaries and to establish, change, or tear down such boundaries. In our society, we have for centuries distinguished between two categories, nature and culture. These two categories are first of all purely human, and they are for specific because they can only be applied indirectly to animals, the environment, or other organisms without the human you. The category of nature includes everything that is naturally given. The category of culture includes everything created by humans. This division became particularly important during the Enlightenment, but also today, when not only social systems were overturned from absolutism to democracy, but also the fears of science and society, for example, events like the Copernican revolution or Newton's theory of gravity. Nature and culture have always defined our rules and actions. A major problem with these two categories of distinction is, in other words, the nature of culture. Culture is defined by human, but at the same time, this means that the actor defining the situation has also unconsciously adopted existing thought traditions of the natural or the nature. This problem arises in human society, particularly in relation to the three categories: gender and sex, social and economic status, and class and ethnic origin or race. These three categories have long been used as patterns of interpretation in our society to define, limit, or abolish hierarchies, rights, duties, freedoms, and opportunities. We in the Western world have always been confronted with the problems of inequality between women and men, the predominance of white people, and discrimination against people of color, and the severe disadvantages of the poor and advantages of the rich. All these spheres and categories are approached and considered differently by Donna J. Haraway in her works. Starting with a manifesto for cyborgs, she criticizes all three categories and the patriarchal white power complex behind them, and tries to achieve a metaphysical and physical reinterpretation of our society through the cyborg. This part of the research project first examines this and then focuses on the other work, such as Modest Witness, Situated Knowledge, Promises of Monsters, Primate Visions, Dangerous to Trouble, and all them shed light on these upheavals in society and sciences in different ways. It is interesting to note that these texts not only complement each other, but also that Haraway rethinks and reinterprets all theories, like the cyborg, for example, in more recent works. In this way, political events such as the climate change and its consequences for humans, animals, the environment, and our life on this planet are brought to the fore, as well as media examples of literature, films, software, music, and art interpretations. The aim is to use Haraway's theories and ideas for a critique of social boundaries in order to show these misguided structures on the basis of selected examples and then to reinterpret them with Haraway's ideas. Here too, in a second approach, Haraway's concept will be supplemented by the ideas of other thinkers. Since social boundaries often overlap with scientific boundaries, the third part of this project will focus on patriarchal scientific culture and conclude the project from this perspective. Okay, the last part of my dissertation is about the male-dominated scientific culture. Our science thrives on categorization, discrimination mechanisms, research and evaluation of facts, as well as the evaluation of research results and their interpretation for the social and scientific context. In order to work out, these facts, we use theories, questions, measuring instruments, laboratories, experimental fields, field studies, and so on. All of these physical and metaphysical tools set up in the context of research and science serve as guidelines for conducting experiments, field research, and projects, and for then selling them as common goods. Of course, like humanities, sometimes it's it's difficult to adapt this for the economic market, but I thought it would be ideal just to mention this here. It has been known for a long time that these tools are not always objective, either because the user is biased in some way or because the tool was created on the basis of a critical data situation. In particular, the gender gaps that accompanies us every day can be seen as a particularly problematic embodiment of misinterpreted data sets. At the latest since feminist research and activism, it has become clear that there is a lack of female multi-ethnic and queer perspectives, influences, and theories in science. This has already been made clear by the impressions and objections of researchers such as Karen Barat, Corinna Barth, Waltraud Ernst, Judy Weitzman, and Donna J. Haraway herself, who have pointed out deficiencies in scientific evaluation standards, the scientifically inadequate infrastructure, but also with regard to the working climate. For example, the lack of role models, sexism, discrimination based on origin, sexual orientation, disabilities, and so on. Donna Haraway addresses all these levels in 4 of her works: Situated Knowledge, Primate Visions, Modest Witness, and When Species Meet. In these 4 works, Haraway points out the theoretical perspective within scientific research in terms of knowledge creation, involved actors, research analysis, and judgment. As in Situated Knowledge, published in 1985, this leads to an approach of temporary knowledge in which knowledge is replaced by new facts and thus has only a temporary validity, allowing for progress and change in science. Another analysis concerns the use of experiments and experimental objects in science and research. Haraway wrote Primate Visions in 1989 and Modest Witness a little bit shorter in 1993 to expose and critique catastrophic abuses, but also to show how applied culture can distort or compromise results in science. In Primate Visions, she examines US primate research and analyzes the entanglements of humanities, culture, and its influences on scientific findings and application processes. Modest Witness takes a similar approach, but looks more at the study of technology itself, the influence of capitalist industrial aspirations, such as big companies like DuPont, and how we sell, manipulate, mutilate, or even kill our nature, especially women, animals, lab animals, microorganisms, for our progress, consumption, capitalist aspirations, and social change. This work also includes Haraway's analysis of reproductive medicine and the world of women, showing how disconnected we already are from the natural, as I have shown before. The 4th work, When Species Meet, deals with the utility of humans and animals. Here, Haraway examines our sometimes drastically different ways of dealing with animals, which depending on their function, and that can lead completely different lives and existences. For example, we have the difference between domestic animals, lab animals, and animals used in science or other field of economical approaches. The spectrum ranges from pets to experimental animals in various research institutions, to animals as domestic beings for agriculture, to animals as consumer products, such as those found in factory farming and food production. All of these areas are closely linked to the patriarchal scientific culture. The aim of part 3 is to show how much our science, which otherwise has the reputation of being objective, is already poisoned in its foundations by the values of particular social culture. This also shows the urgent need for a shift towards an inclusionist scientific practice, which includes the consideration of active participants, such as laboratory animals, who until now have only been seen as purely capitalist objects without rights. Furthermore, this part will also show how our existing value mechanisms can overcome these limits of our science in the face of such procedures. Donna Haraway's work is a good example of scientific research that exposes what goes wrong and offers a perspective on science that has never been found in Western scientific culture. So with this, I now want to come to my conclusion. Boundaries were and are an essential part of the human's thinking. Cognitive differentiation into dualisms, categories, ontologies, and so on are typical human behavioral approaches. The emerged results, as shown in sketches above, are not always free of misjudgments, but also not immune to deliberate degradation, discrimination, exclusion, and even violence. The three main parts of my research project are intended to explore this and to illustrate with the selected examples. Another important and final complement will be the integration of this analysis into a current social and scientific structure, which will be dealt with in due course. The way science has been organized up to now, which leads to the exclusion of different actors, humans, animals, and also mechanical species, which we also maybe have in future to keep in mind, cannot continue. Within these challenging and daily changing times, communication become a decisive factor and is also discussed within Haraway's work. The limits of science and the resulting possibilities, but also the consequences, can also only be evaluated if you find a way for a fairer and more common communication and will to implement these open-minded structures within science and society. This will must also serve to distribute resources, results, opportunities, and potentials fairly and to find diplomatic solutions in difficult areas in order to achieve an appropriate and satisfactory outcome for all protagonists. One solution to the misguided culture of communication could be the current emerging idea of science and tech diplomacy. This new tradition of scientific thinking explores the links between science and diplomacy, seeks to establish new standards for assessing the impact of science and technology, and find ways to link results in science and society at the international level. The main actors, for example, government, research institutions, industry, legal systems, and the public are included in the system in order to consolidate advanced technology, theories, and knowledge for a common, safe, and forward-looking path. The science and tech diplomacy approach could help to jointly overcome problematic boundaries within science and to establish new values and standards for science and research that could be combined with the ideas from humanities and cultural sciences to achieve a more open, democratic, inclusive academia. It remains to be seen what extent this approach will be successful and whether it can also be applied to science, cultural sciences, and the humanities, as this concept is still in the process of being established in many countries. In fact, it could provide a scientifically and sound approach to rethinking boundaries by replacing critical areas and values with a high potential for discrimination, such as gender, economic affiliation, and so on, with more value-free norms and mechanisms. I chosen this idea also because Haraway is referring in many of her works on, let's say, global topics, also in the more recent works. This is a huge image on her to also implement the ideas of indigenous people and international NGOs who still don't have any action or power within the global system. So to conclude, this research project will hopefully contribute to the debate about misguided boundaries, a reorientation, and ultimately the reform of social, scientific, and physical culture. Thank you very much for your attention.